Hello, everyone. Welcome today for our webinar. We have Peg Beer here doing What's in Bloom for August. My name is Daniel Capp. For our regular attendees, Sally Burrows is still out of commission, but we wish that she gets better soon. For those of you who have never been with us before, this is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So we can't see you or hear you. But you can, of course, see us and hear us. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to have Peg answer, or anything that I need to attend, then you can reach out to us through our Q&A panel or our chat box. Either one I will be able to see. Let's see, at the end of this webinar, probably by tomorrow, we will have this recording ready to go on YouTube. So for anybody who can't stay the whole time, or if you've come in a little bit later, you'll be able to see the entire webinar on YouTube. I think that is all the housekeeping that I have right now. So before I turn it over to Peg, just a slight introduction. Peggy has been with us for almost since the Merrifield's inception. She is just a wonderful person, has been heading up our perennials department for the longest time, and as well as one of our great container designers, and used to be on our TV show, the Merrifield Gardening Advisor, with Debbie Capp, my mother, and David Yost as well. But Peg, it is, as always, a pleasure to have you again today. So I'm going to leave it over to you.
Thank you very much, Danny, for your fantastic intro. When we decided to do this What's in Bloom in August, I knew that there was a lot, but I don't think I realized just how much until I began to walk the walk and make some decisions as to what I would have time to present. And I probably have more things here than I actually have time for, because we're really loaded with wonderful color. Now, it is mid-August, and it is a very good time to plant. The wonderful thing is, well, yes, there are annuals. There are some that will go with the frost, okay? But most of these things are perennials. And it's a great time to go ahead and get them in the ground, just as long as you do proper watering. The one thing that I would like to emphasize to you is when you plant a plant, anytime really, but particularly in the summertime when it can be quite warm, you need to check the soil at least every other day to determine, is that soil still moist? You don't want to keep it wet, but you do want it to be moist down in. We have had light showers in a lot of places. Some places have had a good rain, but for me, I always feel like the rain goes this way and the rain goes this way, and I'm kind of high and dry. But I have had a lot of very light showers that do nothing to help that plant that's planted in the ground or in the containers. They have to be watered in spite of the fact that you think you're getting a good rain. Do go out and check and feel the soil to determine, is it really moist? Because drying out is an issue. And having said that, let's talk about the fact that a lot of us have gone on vacation, or maybe we put our container plants together earlier in the season, and maybe parts of those are not doing well. I have had gorgeous, gorgeous petunias until I went on vacation, and everything else came through. But now, granted, I had somebody watering, okay? But the petunias are looking a little peaked right now. And so going out into the annual section where there's so many fresh new plants, it's wonderful to add back in maybe petunias, because most people don't realize that even as we get cooler even going into possibly November, these petunias will tolerate, actually sometimes enjoy, cool weather and light frost. And so they will last for a long time, and it's worth the investment to go ahead and maybe work around something that needs to be replaced, dig it out and replace it with this. Now, the other thing is, in addition to watching your watering, you want to fertilize. And there are a number of different fertilizers. Just as an easy thing, Bloom Booster liquid fertilizer is as easy as it gets. And you can do it every 2 weeks, and that's not too much. Don't ever water dry soil. Water the container first, and then add the liquid. You'll mix this with water and then water into that. So watering is the key. So if you come into our annual sections, you will discover a lot of color. As I said, there's the petunias, and now you think fall, but these are so beautiful. There are so many oriental peppers, and look at the color pickup with this. If I can get it turned around, it's really lovely. And so you can also add these things in, and these are good until a frost takes them out. Celosia is an annual that has really become extremely popular, and there's many different varieties of this. This is a lovely one, and look how pretty that is combined with that oriental pepper. Really neat. And Kelly, over near you there, honey, if you could hand me that one, because there's different types. There's the plume and there's the crested. This one is a beauty too. It's just coming into bloom, and soon it will be covered with blooms. You can actually dry these nicely too. If you want to cut a few of them, hang them upside down in a dry location, and they dry beautifully. So there are lovely annuals out there to choose from to renew your color or start over with some beautiful color. And let's go to the very first picture, Kelly, and I can show you what some of my petunias are doing right now. This is a lovely one that I really do enjoy, and it works well with the other things that are in the pot. I have a lot of lantana, and it's thriving, and if you need more color, there's fresh lantana to go with it. So this works really well. Okay, let's go into the shrubs. We want to hit some of these topics because there's a couple of things that are shown in this picture, and this is taken in my own garden last week, and it shows the beginnings of crepe myrtle. It was just coming into bloom, and I saw a couple of them in full sun in the neighborhood that were just covered in blossoms, and I thought, oh, I really should get a picture of that, and then I didn't. But these are mid-size. Now, we want to talk about the fact that I have a fairly large area, but even in small spaces, with the things that you really enjoy, you can choose from those things and layer. Even in a townhouse garden, there are crepe myrtle that are geared to the size of a townhouse garden. In fact, those in the background would work because they're more in the 12 to 15 foot area rather than 20 and above. So there's a crepe myrtle for everybody out there, and it's just beautiful and stays in bloom for a long period of time. And then you've got the winter interest in the bark. Hydrangeas. Hydrangeas are extremely popular, okay? And they will take some shade too. In fact, most of them would enjoy some shade. They'll thrive in full morning sun, dappled light. Some of them, the microphyllus, definitely need a little relief from the hottest afternoon sun. And in the front is what we often refer to as the mop hydrangea, and it is the microphylla. And most of them bloom on old wood, so be very careful with your pruning shears. This is not the time to prune unless you're just removing any old blossom, or you're trying to cut them to bring some in. Don't make really long cuts because they need time to set that bud for next year. And then next spring, don't go back and cut them a great deal, because remember, the biggest bloom is going to come in the early spring on old wood. This is one that does rebloom spasmodically, and it's very attractive, but there's never as heavy a bloom on that particular endless summer as there is in the spring. So you want to be careful with the pruning. The one behind it is Hydrangea paniculata, and that one blooms on new wood. And so you can cut it back pretty heavily in the springtime, and it won't matter because it's going to bloom on new wood. So these are 3 things that are in bloom in August and will continue to be in bloom going into September. And you can harvest the blossoms of these hydrangeas. They dry beautifully and wonderful for dried flower arrangements even in the winter time. So those are prime things for your landscape. And showing up those same hydrangeas, but from a different viewpoint, because this is in a raised bed. It's probably a 5-foot brick wall and a change of grade there. So you're looking at the other side of this. And there's a lot going on, even in a small bed. It's probably only 8 feet wide there. And you are seeing those hydrangeas above the wall. You're seeing the beautiful crepe myrtle above the wall. But below are hibiscus. This is a hardy hibiscus. And I have to confess that I did not bring up some of the beautiful new cultivars that there are out in our perennial section because they were very heavy, number one. But this, believe it or not, is a seedling. They don't seed profusely, but they do seed. Now, they're not necessarily going to come true to that parent plant, but they're beautiful. And I have a gorgeous red one that's just coming into bloom right behind it. When they're finished blooming, you can trim them back slightly. And in the fall, when you trim them back, leave some of that stem sticking up 2 or 3 inches so that you will always know where that's planted and not look at it and think bare ground, oh goodness, I've got a place to plant something else. No, you don't. There's a hibiscus there. But the only way you remember is if you leave some stems and you know that it's there, because it's what we call a late sleeper. It comes up after most everything else is up. And so you want to be able to know where it is. Now, for longevity's sake, this is how I combine things because I love diversity. I like to have something in bloom in spring, something in summer, and something in going into fall. And so right in front of that hibiscus are some low-growing spirea. And they bloomed in the spring. I cut them back somewhat. They'll do a little bit of reblooming, but their beauty is the color of the foliage. And that adds to that particular bed. There is also Rudbeckia. We're going to talk a little bit more about Rudbeckia as we go along. And the next one is a little bit bigger, a little better close-up of that, showing those hibiscus with the golden foliage, because you get color, not just in bloom. You get it in the foliage color too. And it's good for the sunshine, but sometimes in the shade, you get more color out of foliage than you do out of flowers, okay? So, in the next one, this one is my garden beside the road, okay? I say frequently that this is the most enjoyed place by all of those who pass by. And very important. And this garden is pretty long. It's probably 100 feet long, but kind of narrow. It's probably 15 feet wide at the widest here. And it's got a lot going on because I have bulbs blooming in the spring, and then I have pansies coming and a few other things in bloom. And then you have the echinacea. Most of those in this area are the pink variety, but I just walked the walk this morning with Romero outside in the perennials. There are some absolutely striking colors in Acacia now. And they're fantastic because after they finish blooming, they set those cones, and the goldfinches love them. And once you've gotten it established, a couple of years down the road, if you take away carefully the probably only 2 inches down, if you deadhead, take that one away, then it will continue to bloom right into October. But you want to leave those last blossoms and let them dry, because the goldfinches will appreciate that, okay? Now, phlox, we'll talk a little bit about as we go along. There are beautiful summer phlox, and there's some large flowered head flowers that we have downstairs. This particular one has a lot of flowers, but they're small, and it is absolutely one of my favorites. It's called Phlox Gina, J-E-N-A. And next to that is an ornamental grass. I like the mid-sized ornamental grasses, those whose foliage is relatively low, but sends up what we call inflorescence. We don't call it a bloom because it's not a flower per se, but it sends up its tall inflorescence, and it's a see-through plant, and it complements all the others. You can see through and see that there is a canna behind it. And if we come back to me, I want to mention, because Romero said, please show this plant this morning. This is brand spanking new, and I love it. I think this one is probably going to go home with me. I don't think I can resist it, because again, this is low, relatively low foliage. It will send up its inflorescence, which it's beginning to send up right now. It has that beautiful variegation, and it doesn't drop seeds and become invasive, okay? And I'm going to spell this Schizocarium, because I may pronounce it incorrectly. Schizhyrium. And it's called chameleon. Wonder why? Could it be because its foliage is so interesting and changeable? But this grass would be lovely with any of these perennials that I'm showing right now. Granted, it's not in bloom, but we need to talk about some of those things that are very complementary to the bloom also. So we showed that one, and I think the next one's a little bit of a closer. Is it? Yeah, here we go. This is from a slightly different angle so that you could perhaps see that particular grass. And I would like to say that that one is Andropogon. That's a little easier to pronounce. A-N-D-O-P-O-G-O-N, Andropogon. And it's called Rain Dance. And its inflorescence is really interesting. But I think it works really well with that fine foliage and the broader leaf foliage of that canna behind it. And again, that's Phlox Gina beside it. Now, in the fall, August, September particularly, and going beyond sometimes, there are a couple of plants that I really do enjoy. And I call them my R plants and my H plants. This is a Rudbeckia. And long blooming, not invasive, but sometimes will seed or run slightly, not invasive in my opinion, okay? This particular one is planted at our entrance here at the Fairhope's location. And it's Rudbeckia Viet's Little Susie. I love this plant, and it blooms for a long period of time. And then you've got those little seed heads in there that the birds love, particularly the finches. I love watching the finches. But there are other Rudbeckias also, and it can give you a slight succession of bloom. So rather than to go in all the varieties of Rudbeckia that are available, please visit the perennial section and look over right now, because there are a lot of them in bloom, and see how many different varieties there are. And in the next one is showing again another variety of Rudbeckia, and it plays well with all these other perennials. The echinacea particularly is good with that. Okay. Now, I would go into another Rudbeckia that is incredible. This, though, is a very tall one. So this is a back of the border kind of thing that would work even behind the hydrangea or behind some of these other things, except it does like full sun. Or when I say full sun, that means a minimum of 6 hours of full sun. This is Rudbeckia lacinata, Laciniata, and it's spectacular. I love the seed heads on this one, so leave it up and let the birds enjoy it. Okay, let's go to my H plants. This is Heliopsis summer sun, and it has been in bloom for over a month, and it will continue to bloom for quite some time. And I do have some interesting ones behind me. Okay, let's come back. Oh, wait, before you go away, what are the complementary plants there? Perovskia is the taller one in the background, in bloom now, stays in bloom for a really long period of time, and we'll go into September into bloom. And then there's Geranium Roseanne in front of that one, and it blooms off and on all summer long. But coming back to me, this is that incredible Heliopsis summer sun. That's one of my absolute favorite H plants. And if I can lift it, because it's heavy, but this is so spectacular. And I do want to tell you about, thank you, Kelly. She's come to my rescue, because this one is very heavy. I've got to get it so you can see those blooms. They are spectacular. This one is a Heliopsis also, but it's called Bleeding Hearts, and it changes up in its color considerably. Now, I'm learning something about this one. It's relatively new, and I planted one in my garden last year, and I discovered that it does seed, and the seedlings can be slightly different, and they're not obnoxious at all. I don't consider a seeding thing to be obnoxious unless it's really difficult to pull up with control. But I am thrilled with this plant because it has been in bloom for over a month, and I see buds that are going to keep this going right through September. So part of my H plants, these are Heliopsis, Heliopsis. And then we go to another H plant, and this one is Helenium, Helen's flower, okay? And it is a beautiful, these make great cut flowers also, and last for a long time in water. So when we plant things, we like to be able to go out and cut some of them sometimes and bring them in, because I love arranging. I actually have, again, one of those, if I can, some of these are rather large, okay, but I didn't have any choice. So let's come back to me again. And this one is Helenium, okay, and it's called Mardi Gras because it's multicolored. Now, deadheading keeps these in bloom longer. And where do you do that? The ones that are finished, you just go back to that first set of leaves, and you can see there's another bud there, and you chip that away, and then this bud's going to come up. So that's what keeps a lot of these blooms in, a lot of these plants in flower for a long period of time. Okay, Those are fantastic. There are other H plants, okay? But we've only time to show those. Now, very popular in the next one, of course, is the Asclepias. Asclepias tuberosa, okay? This is the plant that the monarch really loves. But it's a plant that I love also. And if we come back, I do have one that just came in this morning, which Romero gave to me and said, oh, please show this because it's so important. It's absolutely lovely. Now, you got to plant more than one because this is what the monarch lays its babies on. Okay, and it's going to eat it. The leaves, okay. Won't kill the plant. It'll come back from the roots next year. But here's something that's interesting with this. When these flowers are finished, the seed head is so interesting. And when it dries and opens up, the seeds inside are very silky. And I enjoy this too, but the grandchildren really enjoy it. You pick one off and you go, and all those seeds go everywhere and they germinate. But they like to be in soil that's on the dry side. They don't like a lot of moisture. So if you've got an area in the garden in the wintertime that stays wet, or that stays wet during the year, that's not where you want to plant this particular plant, okay? It likes hot and dry. Not bone dry, but dry, okay? So that's a beauty that we really need to have in our garden, as long as you have at least 6 hours of sun per day. Okay, we mentioned the one phlox, the Paniculata series. This is the summer phlox. And I showed you Jena, J-E-N-A. The flowers are smaller than this, but they're very prolific. And I really do enjoy it. But there are other phlox. And in the next picture, you can see the butterflies absolutely love the phlox. And if you deadhead from the top, okay, not too far down, on these, when the flowers go by, they will set more flowers, okay? Now, I know there are some people that don't like butterfly bush because some of it drops its seeds and can be a problem. I've never really had a problem with that. And if there are some that I don't want, I pull them up right away, okay? But there are also some that don't seed now, okay? But this is much, much loved by the birds, bees, and butterflies. And here again, deadheading is important. And that means going just a little beyond that flower, snipping the old flowers off, and it will set new ones just below and come out and continue to bloom. And in the next slide, we have absolutely one of my favorites, and that is Allium millennium. There are a lot of alliums that actually our bulbs, our fall bulbs, are just beginning to come in now. And there are a lot of the giant alliums that I absolutely feel I've got to have in my garden. But this one is a late summer bloomer. It does drop a few seeds, but it's not prolific in doing that. And I'm actually delighted to have those babies come up because then I move them into a space where they can grow along, and the babies next year will be lovely. But this particular clump is probably at least 2 years old, if not 3. And it's actually thriving in a ground cover of Rhus, R-H-U-S, that I love because it's evergreen and it's so dense that very few things grow through it. But this allium does. And amazingly, I can spot the little seedlings, and I can, with my little trowel, go inside and dig those out just slightly and then put them in a little bed where I know they're going to grow along and I'll be able to enjoy them in my garden or give them away to someone else that will enjoy them. And this particular garden is the same garden that I showed you earlier with the hydrangea, and it's literally in my driveway. And I do enjoy it so much because this is a solid green base for a lot of plants that are in containers that I enjoy. And a few of these things that are actually in bloom right now, which I do enjoy also. This is a little closer view, and it's really not quite as colorful as it actually is. So I'm not sure this represents the color terribly well. And I should have brought up one of the plants because, again, Romero just got a shipment in that is absolutely delightful. And it's instant. You don't have to wait for that baby to grow. And I don't know whether you're like me, but I particularly kind of like instant right now. And in the next picture, this one actually is taken in the garden in the front of the Fair Oaks location. And it's Amsonia hubrecti. There are a number of varieties of Amsonia, but this is my favorite. I love the foliage. It blooms in the spring, has a beautiful little yellow, I beg your pardon, blue bloom. And it's kind of insignificant, but interesting. Its claim to fame is the beautiful foliage that is a background for a lot of other plants. And there's a lot of plants next to this. There's nothing in front of it, but in my garden there is. I have it as a background plant. Now, when the weather turns cooler, this foliage is a brilliant yellow-orange and stays that way for a couple of weeks. So its claim to fame is being a beautiful background plant through the summer season, and then fall is spectacular. Now, I have talked about a lot of plants here that primarily need sunshine. As I said, an absolute minimum of 6 hours of direct sun. I have a few things that will enjoy shade or tolerate shade, one or the other, that I think are incredibly interesting. And again, I keep referring to Romero because this is primarily perennials, and he just got in some shipments this morning that are absolutely delightful, saying, show this, show that, show the other. And I said, I got all I can talk about right now. But I had to bring up Triceratops. Okay. Had to bring up this plant because it's so exciting to me. It is a variegated leaf, Tricyris, Triceratops. And this particular variety is samurai. It has variegated foliage, but I don't know that you can see the blossom is incredible. It's just beautiful. And it blooms for a long period of time because it has a lot of buds on it. But this is a beautiful thing to include in your shade garden. Here is another that will grow in full sun, but it will also tolerate a lot of shade and moisture. If you have an area in your garden that gets some sun, really good dapple sun throughout the day, because it needs some sunshine, and it's moist, this is the plant for you. But it blooms at this time of the year for about a month. As you know, most perennials have a period of bloom time. That's why we like to combine some of the annuals in the right place to give you a continuity of bloom, because perennials are interesting, wonderful, come back, dependable, but they do have a bloom time. And this is the bloom time for cardinal flower, lobelia, 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 cardinal flower. And it's lovely. And here again, the birds, bees, and butterflies. And a lot of these plants that I've talked to you about are native, and this happens to be one of them, okay? Here is another one. Okay. This one is just coming into bloom in my garden and just in bud out here in the perennial section. And it's a Japanese anemone, anemone, anemone. And it's called Honorine Joubert. This is an older variety, but as far as I'm concerned, it's still my favorite. It's a beautiful, beautiful white single blossom, about 2.5 inches across, I suppose. And here again, it sets a lot of buds and blooms for a long period of time. So that is a fun one to have. Now, he asked me to mention the fact that he's got so many beautiful coral bells, and that's fine too, but most of those bloom in the spring and early summer, and they're grown, the shade plants, as foliage color. Okay, but bear in mind that I told you about that. I think we do have a couple, we have a picture where they can see that tricertus a little. There we go. Maybe you can see that bloom because I took this from my garden, okay? Maybe you can see that bloom. It's very unusual and very interesting. And then in the next picture is the cardinal flower. And this one does seed about where it's happy. But again, I never consider this obnoxious because it's the more the better. And it's very easy to pull up. Now, when I say, I know it's wonderful to show you plant by plant and the interest in that flower, but I also like to see things that it grows well with. And something that probably isn't planted enough, but I do love it, and it is a bamboo, but it's not that tall, invasive bamboo. This is a clump bamboo. And it only gets about 5, maybe 6 feet tall. And the clump increases in size, but it does not have runners. It is a clumper. And it tolerates a lot of shade. It will grow with a lot of sun, but it tolerates a lot of shade. And it also tolerates the same kind of moisture thing that this lobelia does. It doesn't have to have it. Okay, it will grow where it's normal. Okay, I'm not going to say that it likes to be totally dry in a dry space, but it is a wonderful background flower. And I mean, not flower. I mean, it's not a shrub, it's a bamboo. Okay, in front of that and bordering a path in the edge of my wooded area is the beautiful golden thing that you see is Hakanakloa. And so all of these things play well together. Okay. Now we're not ready for the next picture yet. We need to talk a little bit first. Okay, let's talk about some issues that are a little aggravating at times. Aggravating me. I've got 2 mothers with 2 Bambis in the garden right now. And I don't think they've taught them enough about what they're supposed to eat and not eat. Okay. So if you are plagued with deer population, it's really hard. It's hard to go out and see something that you have been waiting for, and daylilies, oriental lilies, some of these other things are just breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and particularly for the Bambis, you know. So there are a few of these things that are very resistant to the deer, and a lot of the perennials are. Most of the H plants are pretty resistant. They're certainly not the first thing that they eat. Certainly they won't eat the peppers either, okay? They will munch on the petunias. And unfortunately, these beautiful shade plants that I just showed you, all 3 of those are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so if you have a lot of deer and you love those plants, you've got to protect them. You either spray with a product like Bobex, which is the only way I'd ever have anything, and you've got to be consistent with it, or you put some deer netting around it. And you know, it's amazing how you can do that without having it be terribly obvious. So those are about your only options, is to spray or to use the deer netting. But now in the next picture, Kelly, this has nothing to do with color in the garden, but there are just a few things that I do want to share with you that are pertinent for right now. Many years ago, Bob Warhurst designed a tomato cage that was 2 parts and combined really easily. And it wasn't long before I said, okay, we're using these around tomatoes, and they're wonderful because sometimes people forget to stick things until they're too big to get a smaller cage around. And then you can go ahead, because it's in 2 pieces, and put it on there. So they're fantastic for staking a lot of things, particularly tomatoes and cucumbers to grow on and that kind of thing. However, they're also fantastic for using around choice shrubs to keep the deer from tearing them up in the autumn. Okay, and it can start sometimes in September. Now, the bucks are getting that fuzz off their antlers. Maybe they're marking their territory. For whatever reasons, they always seem to know the most expensive plants in my garden. And those seem to be the ones that they rub. And they can rub them so badly that they're either totally disfigured or dead, one or the other. And so I found that I have extras of these too, but I can also take the ones from the tomatoes if the tomatoes are finished and use those to put around the shrub. Now, I didn't push I just took this a couple of days ago. I didn't push those into the ground because it's very easy to do, and connect it because I wanted you to see how it connected. It's fantastic. And if you have deer, and if you have prime shrubs, you do have to be aware of the fact that rubbing can start in September, go through October, and into November. So that I have found is indispensable. Now, another thing that I want to share with you also is we're just bringing in now the fall vegetables. And I know that a lot of people don't think about these fall vegetables until later in September. And that's getting on the late side if you want to have broccoli that really produces well, or cabbage that really produces well. It works fine for turnips and leafy crops and lettuces and that sort of thing. But it's time to start now with these vegetables. And you can do some that are purchased already ready to go into the ground, and do a few things from seeds also. I do that particularly with lettuce. I will put a few plants in now, even though it's warm, and they love morning sun and afternoon shade. So you've got it made if you've got a shady area. And go ahead and put some of those plants in, but buy some of the seeds and start some things from seed also, so that you'll have a continuity of availability of these plants. But Southerner that I be, born and raised in the Deep South, love collard greens, turnip greens, and kale. Kale has become a biggie for a lot of people because it's so healthy. And they're very easy to grow, but you can start them now. And then you can start smaller ones from seeds later. And here again, you've got some continuity going on with that. You can even do onions We even have sets from onions, and I just brought up the broccoli as a reminder that it's not too early to go ahead and start these things. Okay, it is still warm, and there are cabbage butterflies out there, and they may then get on these plants. There is a spray that is totally non-toxic. It's very organic that can be used on this. Or you can use a row cover to cover them and keep them from getting onto the leafy vegetables, particularly the broccoli and the cabbage and the kale too, to some degree. But I love to have all these fresh vegetables that are organic, and I don't have to worry about the fact that, oh, this has been sprayed with a toxic spray and I really got to wash it well, you know. So just as a reminder that 'tis the season. Okay. Now I mentioned I do have a picture, I think. Yeah, I did put a little picture in. Just begun to start the cabbages and some of the kales behind it. Okay, so this is the season to do that. I love those fresh cabbage that you can just go out in October and pick those heads of cabbage and bring them in. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about bulbs. Our bulbs are now coming in, and there are just a few of them that you really need to get into the ground as soon as you possibly can. Okay, most of them are fine to wait. You can make your selection while the selection's good, and they're not all in yet. They're just dribbling in. They're just coming in right now. However, these are in, and it's something that not everybody knows about. It's called colchicum, colchicum, and it's an autumn crocus. This happens to be a double one. There are a lot of singles also, but this particular bulb blooms in the fall. Actually, it comes into bloom usually late September. And if you don't get this one in the ground right away, it will sprout up and it won't do well this year. It may stay there and be good and come next year, but not this year. So this is a bulb that you do need to get into the ground right away. Colchicum, okay, autumn crocus. And there are a couple of other things too. I noticed that we were getting in a nice selection of bearded iris. This is the time to go ahead and get those into the ground if possible also. And they usually give you some planting directions to go along with that. Now let me see, have I covered most of the terrace? No, I haven't. There's a couple of things I need to show you, and I promised I would. This one needs some sun, but it will also tolerate some shade. And it's a plant that I've had in my garden for years, but the white variety. This one is a beautiful purpley blue variety. It's called Calameris, Kalimeris. Japanese aster is the common name, but I've always called it Calameris. And it grows a little taller than this as it gets older. Mine is probably 2.5 feet tall, and it does increase in size. And so when you've had enough, you have to dig part of it out, okay? But the beauty of this plant is that it blooms all summer long into fall and doesn't require deadheading. I like that. Yeah, I do. And there's one more unusual one back here that I need to say, because we don't carry these all year, not when they're in bloom. And this one requires some sun. And I don't think that the deer have bothered this in my garden. It's Crocosmia. Very, very interesting plant. It looks like gladiola or iris foliage, but it isn't either, and sets up these nice spiky blooms, which also can be cut as cut flowers. Crocosmia, Crocosmia, Crocosmia. Okay, that's all good. Now, I usually enjoy showing you a picture of little Clara, my great-granddaughter, because I advocate introducing all these young people to gardening, to nature at least, to get them outside, to appreciate the birds, the bees, and the butterflies, and the beauty. Okay. So Clara joins me frequently, and I am preparing a special little play place right now for Clara and her little sister Lydia. And it is, I'm calling it their fairy garden, okay? But on this particular segment, Clara is on vacation. So we don't have Clara in the garden right now. But, you know, she's got a lot going for her. She's got that hat on. And I believe in the hat and I believe in the gloves. And I do use both. I know that a lot of people enjoy the feel of the soil, but I like to have my hands covered. So it's time to grab your gloves and grab your spade and get some of these beautiful flowers in the ground, because I actually grow most of these and I do enjoy them. There are some new varieties among them. Most of them are native. Some are what we call nativars. They're cultivars, okay? But I love them all. I am not someone that says you've got to have just native. Okay, I think we'll have a little bit of time for some questions. Okay, Danny? Just a few questions, babe?
One sec. There we go. Wouldn't let me unmute there for a second. So yes, we do have a couple questions, or more than a couple questions, but we'll get through as many as we can. First one is, do you ever use a moisture meter? And if you do, on a scale between 1 and 10 on the meter, when do you usually water?
I do not use a moisture meter, so that is something you can question either at the greenhouse or the information area, because I have never used a moisture meter. I simply look at and feel the soil and know the needs of those plants and follow those needs. I'm sorry, I can't give you directions there.
No worries. Next is with the ornamental peppers that you had shown. Are those at all edible or no?
I'm told that they are, but not. I think let's treat them as ornamental, okay?
Wonderful. Let's see. For a Roseanne geranium that is not blooming, what would you recommend that they could do to possibly get it blooming?
Well, number one, hopefully it's got some sunshine.
Yes, it does get part sun, part sun.
Okay, it needs a minimum of 6 hours of full sun, okay? And Roseanne is a hardy geranium that is sort of leggy. Let's say it grows up and into things, which I love, and it blooms spasmodically. It doesn't normally have a huge flush of bloom, but it blooms randomly. Over fertilization might make a difference, because I have really good soil and I use plant tone a lot, which is not a heavy duty fertilizer, but gives those plants all the boost that they need when they're in the ground, particularly perennials. So I would say maybe it's not getting enough sun. And they're fairly easy to move around. So if you have a place where you could use it and it gets more sun, try it there. Okay.
Gotcha. Going to the cardinal flower, how many years would that live?
It's pretty good about coming back, but it's excellent about seeding. And the seedlings will bloom well the next year, okay?
Wonderful. All right, going over to our chat. Oh, let's see. Someone is wondering about their hydrangeas that have not bloomed yet, and they're wondering if bone meal would be a good additive for it? And if not, is there anything else you'd recommend?
Hydrangeas that have not bloomed well, that would depend upon which hydrangea they have and when or if they pruned, which I have a granddaughter whose friend, she needs to take the pruners away because she's doing pruning at all the wrong times. And with hydrangeas, the Macrophylla, the mop series, you absolutely have got to be careful with pruning. About the only time you can heavily prune is midsummer. And I don't like to do that because then you're pruning away a lot of the beautiful flowers, unless you're going to try to dry them perhaps or use them for cut flowers. But I like them in my garden as long as possible. So pruning those is difficult. You certainly don't want to do it this late because that foliage won't have time to mature, and they bloom primarily and heaviest on old wood. So you've got to be careful with the pruning. So that could be a problem with that. Okay. The others, the paniculatas, can be pruned heavily and it should be blooming. So I have a feeling that it's the Macrophyllus. And on Facebook, I'm a member with several horticultural groups, and I keep hearing on there that people are having trouble with them not blooming. And invariably it's that they pruned at the wrong time. Maybe they're not getting enough sunshine.
Gotcha.
But they don't like full afternoon sun either. Okay.
Okay. Next, someone was wondering if there were any Virginia native plants that are in bloom right now that you'd recommend. You may have already touched on some today, but if there was any others.
Absolutely. But I'm not sit here prepared to give you a list of native plants. Okay.
Okay.
You can go online and do that very easily. But almost all of these plants, almost all of them that I mentioned today are natives or nativars.
Perfect. Perfect. Going to echinacea. Someone has some echinacea that's kind of flopping over. Do you have any recommendations that would help with that?
Well, generally speaking, when they're grown in full sun, they don't flop as much, okay? If they're grown in part shade, then they may have a tendency to flop. One easy thing to do is, if it requires some staking, attractive and easy, and you can even do it after they're good sized. We sell peony rings, and they're wonderful to hold up heavy peonies, but they can also be used, and they come in different heights. They can also be used for other flowers. And so if you have a plant that is flopping and it's flopping now and it's aggravating you, peony rings could be the answer. Okay. The quick answer.
The quick answer. Wonderful. Continuing on with coneflowers, when is the best time to divide and transplant Rudbeckia or other coneflowers?
I would say September is a good time to do that. You don't want to do it right in the height of their season, or better yet, in the early spring. Just as they're coming up is prime time to do that. And dividing is not as difficult as people might think. You would want to go, you could even you could leave half in the ground and with a straight spade, go down to the center and cut around and take part of it out, okay? I would say my favorite time to do that would be in the springtime, just as it's emerging from the ground.
Wonderful. Let's see, next is, you were talking about a plant that the monarchs really like. I believe that might have been the Asclepias. How do you spell that?
Asclepias. Asclepias. Butterfly weed. It's not a weed.
You're talking about a late blooming allium. Is that a bulb, or can we get it as a bulb?
But it's a tiny little bulb. It's not a big bulb like the larger allium that bloom in spring and summer. It's a slit. It looks more like an onion, a young onion. Yes.
A
And they
young,
can be divided easily too. And you can do that as soon as they're finished, or again in the early spring as they're emerging. And you can literally pull those little bulblets apart and have many, okay?
wonderful. Let's see, I have a bunch of questions that are related to asking what these plants were in your presentation. And for the people that are asking those, I will get those, I'll get those answered by Peggy, and we'll send out the handout tomorrow.
We will have to do that because I unfortunately didn't have time to get that done ahead of time, okay?
No worries, no worries.
We'll get it up tomorrow.
We'll get that to you guys tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar. If you guys had any questions that did not get answered by Peg today, we got through most of them actually. Please reach out to myself through the contact us form on our website, merrifieldgardencenter.com, or you can also reach out to Sally Burrows. Even though she is not hosting these right now, she's still behind the scenes helping answer the questions and getting out the emails to everybody. But you can reach her at sburrows, BURROUGHS, at mgcmail.com. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Peg, before we sign off?
It's prime time to plant these things. Just watch your watering. You know, you can plant right through fall, but right now there's so many things in bloom. It's easy to make a decision as to what you really like, and all you have to do is just be a little cautious with how you water it right now while it's hot, because it's gives it some longevity to get those roots set before winter goes in. So grab your gloves, grab your hat, and go work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Peggy, once again. Everybody, thank you for attending today. Please, we look forward to seeing you at any of our locations. We have some wonderful stock coming in, getting ready for late summer and then early fall. We will see you guys next time. Until then, have a great day. Bye-bye.